So they're talking about finding a number of soldiers for a brigade and the equipment for a brigade, and they think they're going to stand that up and send it into battle. But to actually stand up a real brigade that can operate efficiently, that takes a lot more. That is something that they really can't do right now in the middle of a war. And all of that preparation over the last 8 years, that was done under relatively ideal conditions. There's nowhere in Ukraine that you're going to be training large numbers of soldiers and then sending them into battle without Russia sending cruise missiles. I think it was a technological edge that Russia had. They prepared for it well. And that's what I think. I think it was, they've got a coherent army. I think it was underestimated by the U.S. and by Ukraine, and I think that was a contributing factor at least.
Slayer.
Yeah, because I'm
out of wine. I'm on to the apple schnapps now. Great fun. All right, let's take these one at a time.
Ukraine started the conflict out. That was the strongest their army was going to be.
Yes, because when the US entered the Second World War, that was the strongest their army was ever going to be in that war.
First strike.
Oh, honey. Oh, honey, no. No.
Result of 7 to 8 years, the US and other NATO countries coming in and training them.
They also brought in Red Army veterans who had fought in the Afghanistan war to train Ukrainian soldiers. Casually, they forget about that. This idea that Ukraine is a NATO standard army with NATO equipment and NATO trained has been a PR line pumped out by Russian state media since day one. The understanding is if they can claim victory over such an army, then NATO no longer remains a threat in their eyes. Of course, Ukraine is not up to a NATO standard. 2014, during the first Russian invasion, Ukraine had about 7,000 soldiers who were fully combat ready and about a dozen tanks. They went from that to the highly trained, highly motivated army of 200,000 in 8 years. That's impressive. To explain how this was achieved would be a video in itself, not just a drunk-ass reply to someone who should fucking know better. The reality was, it was Ukraine that did that, not NATO. It was their officer corps reforms, it was their intense training, it was their promotion through ranks, etc., that made them the army they are today. The US training helped, certainly. The joint exercises they did with Poland also helped, but this is not a NATO army. This is a Ukraine army. Ukraine trained, Ukraine equipped, with tanks that are a little more than an upgraded version of old Soviet models. I'll leave a link in the description to an article by someone who is actually out there training Ukrainian soldiers. They can explain it way better than I can, and a lot more soberly than I can.
Whole time they were building these fortifications along the line of contact.
What fortifications? This isn't World War II. They weren't rebuilding the fucking Maginot Line. Fortification in a modern day literally just means some sandbags in a fucking trench.
And Russia is still advancing.
Are we watching the same war here? I mean, for fuck's sake, at the time of recording, which is just a few days after this went live, Russia had ended its operational pause on the 14th, well, officially the 14th, actually the 16th, and it launched a number of offensives along the front line, none of which had made any fucking progress. And then they got hit square in the jaw by this massive fucking Ukrainian counterattack. This counterattack has been focusing on Kherson and Kharkiv, two sectors under very different Russian operational commanders who have been, according to Ukrainian intelligence, bickering with each other quite a lot. And in fact, the only reason that they have two separate commanders here and not a single commander in overall operational command is because allegedly one of them threw a fucking temper tantrum when they tried to appoint the other one as overall commander. This is also the two sectors where the Ukrainian HIMARS have been, I'm saying that word wrong, rocket artillery, have been the most effective at taking out Russian ammunition dumps and heavy artillery, meaning Russia cannot simply just summon the artillery, the god of war, to fix all its fucking problems, and now has to decide if it wants to defend Kherson, a city where, citizens were issued Russian passports and were told Ukraine no longer exists, and defending its own border along the Kharkiv region. If Kherson falls by which the time this will actually goes out, it may have already fallen, given the speed of Ukraine's advance, that puts Odessa off the map in terms of Russian territorial prospects, an objective which has been listed as a 1st of August deadline objective. It also threatens Crimea, and there has been increasing talk among the more independent Russian media that it should be abandoned as a goodwill gesture. I mean, I don't think they will. Crimea is too valuable and very easily defendable, but its only supply chain is this very long, very vulnerable bridge. Ukraine have proven they are very good at taking out bridges, and if they do, that will mean every Russian soldier within that Crimea region now cannot escape, and that's going to lose Russia an army.
I'm trying to understand that you're right. Donald Rumsfeld famously said that you go to a war with the army that you got.
Yes, because famously, the US finished World War II with the same army it fucking started the war. What are you talking about?
And as a realistic, as a practical matter, there is simply no way to replace the men who have been lost. It takes months, years, in the case of NCOs, to replace them. So you can forget about that.
Is that why Russia's replacing all of theirs after a month of training? Yeah.
And so it seems to me that the way the Russians are just winning, it's inevitable.
Is it inevitable? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe Russia is inevitable and it will one day rule the world. Somehow, I don't think so. I think what we've learned so far is that the host and Mr. New Atlas don't know a fucking thing about A, reality, or B, what the fuck is actually going on in Ukraine. They seem to exclusively get their information from Russian propaganda, conspiracy theorists, and fucking weirdo-ass fucking blogs. Literally enough, these two same people were claiming that Russia had split the country and the country of Ukraine in half back in March. And that didn't happen, and yet, according to them, Russia is unequivocally winning. Undeniably winning, as it's getting pushed back further and further and further out of strategical, actually important objectives because it was concentrating all of its forces on capturing these fucking propaganda targets so it can pretend to its own fucking people that it's winning, and these fuckers just lap it up. And if you're looking for an investigative journalist, this is not an investigative journalist. This is a man who reads Russian propaganda and then tells you what he's read. It's like when you watch what's his name, Count Dankula video, and he's doing like his opinion piece on politics, and he's literally just reading off of a fucking like Daily Star article. That's not journalism. That's a newspaper reading. He's reading it to you. That's what this fucker is. The other two, the one on the left, Twitter user, the bait of non-credible defense fucking hate this guy. He's brought up all the fucking time. I was expecting the worst out of this guy. So far he hasn't actually fucking said anything. He's got one opinion that he's repeated 3 times. And that opinion is that if you are in New York, standing on top of the Empire State Building, and you look northeast to the small town of Washington, which is about 50 miles away, you should be able to very clearly see a truck parked there because it's on fire and be able to call an artillery strike onto it. This man apparently was an artilleryman, and he doesn't seem to know how artillery works. He has not sat there on a radio, cradling his head in his hands, biting his own nails as a fucking squaddy of recruits has attempted to call it an artillery strike on something they think they can see, don't really know where it is. Yeah, it's about northwest of our position. Cool, what's your position? Hang on, let me check. Dave, you got the map? The map? Yeah. Where does it say we are? I don't know. The numbers. What do the numbers say? I don't know. Mine's not turned on. Turn it on. What does it say? Takes a minute. Hang on. Where are we on this map? I don't know. You're the one with the map. Where are we? I fucking don't know. All right, they're north of 4562. Okay, how far north? What'd you say? Couple of miles? Couple of miles. Okay, we're reading a civilian village up there. You sure that's a target? Hey, Dave, he says it's a civilian village up there. What? He says it's a civilian village. Yeah, it is. Is that where they are? No, they're just in front of the village. No, they're just in front of the village. Just aim in front of the village. I can't. I need coordinates. That's not how it works. you know, he's never fucking had that experience. But, you know, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because I've not really heard him speak. He's yet to speak on why Russia's winning the war. The other guy I've given a gold star to, he has yet to speak on why Russia's winning the war. Let us, because we are gentlemen, because we are kind and we are courteous, we will let them speak and we'll see if they can impress us. Okay, this is not a good story. This is a very, very drunk story. My neighbors are already complaining about me shouting.
And so, Alex, what do you say?
Yeah, it's interesting because I read some reports about the battles that took place in Donbass in 2014 and 2015, and it was very interesting to read because if you just change the names of units and villages, the same comments were made in 2015 as now, and this is what shocked me. I'm like, hold on, wasn't there 7, 8 years of NATO training?
No. It just turns out that we get a repeat of the previous guy's point, a regurgitation of the same PR line spewed out by Russia today. This is a NATO army. It was trained by the US and NATO for 8 years. Therefore, if we can win, or at least claim we're winning, then we proud, strong Russians can beat NATO just like we always claimed we could. All hail Putin, your democratically elected president for life. The suit is worth more than your home and almost all of your fucking possessions. Ignore that we are engaged in a cold political war with China as we each try to pretend to be each other's friends for the propaganda cameras, but really we are fighting over resources in Africa. Ignore that we are literally looting scrap metal from Ukraine and liquidizing the assets of Putin's political opponents to pay for new recruits. Just think of the Soviet Union. Remember the Soviet Union? Remember when we were a mighty empire? Yeah, that was great.
So I still think at the end of the day, the Ukrainian army is still a Soviet army with a NATO hat. At its core, the way they function was still very Soviet, very Russian too. Like the same army is just clashing.
Part of the major reforms to the Ukrainian army over the past 8 years was something Ukraine called decommunization. It changed its uniforms, it got rid of all the Soviet imagery, the title of guards and major divisions. It began to go through its older equipment, decommissioning anything that couldn't be upgraded. But most importantly, it reformed its officer corps. It would raise new officers through the ranks rather than specialized training giving out to those in favor that had been the way under Soviet rule. It would also radically reform its tactical doctrine, its logistics, its artillery and support branches. It would even implement new training programs for civilian militias and the National Guard that more closely resembled Western NATO training. To even start to call them a Soviet army is a level of ignorance so deep. To come to that conclusion, one would have to be so completely unaware of not only the previous 8 years of Ukrainian military reform, but what a Soviet army actually is to begin with. The Russian army today more closely resembles that of the Soviet-style tactics that we are familiar with, and that they went into Ukraine like it was the fucking Fulda Gap, using very much the same invasion plans that they had prepared for West Germany. Armored divisions using tanks and mounted infantry beginning thunder runs towards key targets, linking up with paratroopers and helicopter-mounted infantry which had been sent ahead to capture airfields with smaller militias and motorized divisions and foreign volunteer groups like the Chechens moving in to distract or ambush any organized resistance. Key to these plans would be that any thunder run would have exactly 48 hours of supply in order to facilitate the best possible speed and would have to capture their objectives before resupply was possible. This is exactly how the invasion of Ukraine went about, and why it didn't fucking work.
When you see the problems in 2015, the Ukrainians face the same exact problems nowadays.
Can you be specific?
For example,
in modern propaganda, there is a tactic that you've probably encountered yourself many times called controlled critique. This is when, during a casual discussion on whatever, one of the presenters asks the question to the main speaker that would, on the surface at least, seem to be a form of critique, but in reality is just an excuse to deluge into the PR line that has been prepared for anyone who would ask this obvious question.
We're hoping that one of the children might pop up with a question about the upcoming election. Little girl, do you think you can memorize this by dinner time tomorrow?
Mr. Burns, your campaign seems to have the momentum of a runaway freight train. Why are you so popular?
Very good.
PR line is stated and the critique is silenced, satisfied that their concern has been answered and no further follow-up questions are required. To give you an example, our cigarettes are toasted, making them some of the finest cigarettes in America. Ah, but Mr. Johnson, sir, I did read in the newspaper that cigarettes can give you cancer. I wouldn't believe a word of that. Newspapers today are corporations just like any other. They will print any old thing just to scare you into buying them. They care more about their profit margin than your health. Our cigarettes are the best in America, and that is the bottom line. I'm not saying that this is what these people are doing, but every time they do this little interruption like this is exactly what I'm hearing at the back of my mind.
They were talking about the withdrawal, and there was a battle, Debaltsev, in February 2015, and it was a cauldron type of operation where the Russians encircled the Ukrainian force and the Ukrainians.
Okay, I'm going to skip this part because he just waffles on and on and on about this encirclement and the sank or whatever. To briefly explain, it was an attempt to encircle and destroy a large part of the Ukrainian army. It didn't work, but then a video later emerged of Ukrainian troops, I'll show it here, 3 soldiers, a little out of breath, carrying a heavy machine gun. Because of this video, Russia Today, Sputnik, Eurasia Times, the usual suspects, all used this as evidence that the retreat was completely chaotic, and then later storage emerged that these troops had been abandoned or left to die, etc, etc, etc.
Also, the other thing they mentioned in 2015 is that the Ukraine government would often lowball the amount of casualties. For example, they would say, yeah, we got that many KIA and that many wounded. However, they would say, yeah, but that only includes the soldiers from the armed forces of Ukraine. Doesn't take into account all the volunteer battalions. So you could multiply that number of losses multiple times.
Ukraine have actually been very forthcoming with their casualties. In fact, they've been accused of inflating their casualty numbers to garner sympathy from the West. Russia, however, have not. Russia will admit to about 5,000 casualties. UK intelligence estimates it's actually closer to 50,000 casualties. The Pentagon thinks it's closer to 70,000 casualties. If we use the same logic as history legends and multiply that by many, many times, a comfortable medium is around 55 to 60,000 casualties. To put that in perspective, that is more losses than the US took in both Iraq theatres. It's more losses than all sides took during D-Day. 55,000 losses in 5 months of war is more losses than the US took in 20 years of Vietnam. And yet Captain Chucklefuck here thinks that Russia is winning.
Tyler?
And finally, we have Tyler. Tyler, I'll remind you, is a former artilleryman who does not know how artillery works, does not know the difference between strategical strikes and tactical strikes that artillery would typically be used for under certain circumstances, and thinks if visibility that day is 50 miles, then you should be able to easily spot something as small as a truck from 50 miles away. His single claim to fame is that he has a Twitter account. Tyler is going to give us a rundown of how he thinks the war is going. He does ramble on a bit, so I'm going to cut out a lot of the bits where he repeats himself or just agrees and goes over with what the others have already said.